Thank you, Lawrence. Good morning, members, officers, members of the public, and our guests here today, and those who are viewing us on the live stream. This is a special meeting of the South Cambridge District Council Planning Committee, called in order for us to be briefed on the proposed design guide for the expansion of the Wellcome Genome Campus in Hinxton. My name is Councillor Peter Fane. I'm the chair of the committee. I'll ask those who are joining us remotely to ensure that their camera and microphone remain off unless they're addressing the committee. I won't go through all the small print we sometimes go through. I think most here are fairly familiar with our procedures. Committee members present in the chair, I will now invite each of you to introduce yourselves. Before we do that, my name, I think I've introduced myself. We need to just appoint a vice chair. I've suggested that Councillor Dr. Martin Khan should step in for Jeff Harvey, who is not here. Can I take that by affirmation?
Happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you. Seconded. Affirmation. Lovely. Right. So I've introduced myself, Councillor Martin Khan. And then we'll go around the room and introduce the councillors first, if you'll forgive us.
Martin Khan, one of the councillors for Hinxton and Impington.
Thank you. And we have also with us
Councillor Anna Bradnan, one of the members for Milton and Waterbeach Ward.
Good morning, Bill Handley, one of the members for the villages of Over and Willingham and a member of the Planning Committee.
Good morning, Councillor Richard Williams, member for Whittlesford, Treplow, Heathfield and Newton.
and Peter.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Peter Sanford, one of the members for Caxton and Papworth Ward.
Right, so I can confirm that we are quorate. Before moving on to those who are joining us remotely, I'd just like to introduce our Democratic Services Officer, Lawrence Demery-Homan, who is doing the technical side as well today. Lawrence, perhaps you just introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Lawrence Demery-Homan, and I'm the Democratic Services Officer for the Planning Committee.
I'll introduce other officers in a minute, but before we do that, I just want to identify and introduce those joining us remotely. I won't. Lawrence has a list of us for us.
Right, so we have Councillor Ariel Khan joining us. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Councillor, if possible.
Are you with us,
Hello.
Ariel?
Yes, I'm here. Councillor Ariel Khan for Harston and Cumberton Ward.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our other regular committee member with us today online is Councillor Heather Williams.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. Heather Williams. I represent the Mordens Ward.
Thank you. And then from our substitutes today, we have Councillor Brian Milnes.
Good morning, Brian Milnes, one of the members for Sawston Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Dr. Lisa Redrup.
Oh, is that working? Oh, yeah. Good morning. Hi, I'm Lisa Redrup, one of the members for Harston and Cumberton Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Sue Ellington.
Good morning. I'm Sue Ellington, councillor for Swavesey Ward.
Thank you. And we're also joined by the local member for this application, Councillor Peter MacDonald.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm Peter MacDonald, and both the district and the county councillor covering the area. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Chair, back to you.
Thank you. And we have some officers with us in the chamber today. Vanessa Blaine, who's our senior planning lawyer.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, Vanessa Blaine, legal advisor to the committee.
And James Tipping, who is the principal planning officer.
Good morning, all. Yes, James Tipping, principal planning officer.
Usual rules apply. If any member leaves the meeting, would they please let me or Vice Chair know so that it will be recorded in the minutes. Given the scheduled length of this meeting, I'm not proposing we take any breaks, but obviously signal if required. The agenda for this meeting was published on 11th of May, but there are no accompanying reports. Again, a few formalities. Lawrence, any apologies for today's meeting?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We have a number of apologies today. So we've received apologies from Councillors Henry Batchelor, Toomey Hawkins, William Jackson Woods, and that's it. Thank you.
And perhaps we could add apologies from Councillor Jeff Harvey. Declarations of interest, item 3. Any members have interest to declare in relation to the business of today's meeting? I see no declarations, thank you. So, to the main business, the design guide briefing. This is our substantial item of business today. The briefing on the proposed design guide for the expansion of the Wellcome Genome Campus in Hinxton. And before we hear the briefing, I just want to ask our senior planning lawyer to give a few words of advice and caution.
Thank you, Chair. Members, I know you'll know this, but just to confirm, this briefing today is to bring you up to date with the progress of the development so far and to provide you with factual information on the proposed design guide. Members will, of course, want to keep any questions following the briefing to open questions and refrain from making statements that could be interpreted as bias or influencing the proposed design guide. If anyone's got any questions, please let me know.
So, an important warning for members there. Thank you, Vanessa. So I'm now going to hand over to our Principal Planner, James Tipping, to give a brief introduction, and then I will invite, now forgive me, my brief says urban and civic. You will explain that relationship in a minute, and their consultants to present the briefing. I believe, James, you'll be leading that. Am I right? Yes. And perhaps you will introduce your team then. But first I want to ask James Tipping to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this briefing has been arranged for members to receive a presentation on the design guide for the Wellcome Genome Campus expansion and as part of the pre-application process. The expansion of the Genome Campus is a major development. Oh.
Could I ask you to bring your microphone a little closer, please? It's a sort of...
I'll start again. Yes, so this briefing has been arranged for members to receive a presentation on the design guide for the Wellcome Genome Campus expansion and as part of the pre-application process. The expansion of the Genome Campus is a major development and is of national significance, being granted outline planning consent in Planning Committee back in December 2020. The design guide, excuse me, the design guide is a requirement under condition 21 of the outline planning permission. Given the scale of the development, it is considered appropriate for the design guide to be determined at Planning Committee once the document has been formally submitted for determination. So turning to the presentation itself, the design guide will be presented by Nigel Hugel and Caroline Foster of Urban and Civic, Julia Foster and Helen Pearson-Flett of David. Sorry, is my microphone working? Sorry. Tony Mewson of Wilkinson Architects and Andrew Thornhill of Churchman Thornhill Finch. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. So, who is going to lead off the presentation here?
So I will, Chair. I'm Nigel Hugel. I'm the founder
and Lawrence will come and set you up in a moment.
Okay, sorry about that, Chair. So I'm Nigel Hugel. I'm the founder and the chief executive of Urban and Civic. We're probably better known, certainly, for example, to Councillor Bradman for the development which we're doing in partnership with the Ministry of Defence at Waterbeach, where progress is considerable, and some members will have been and seen. And that commitment to sustainability, which is something that we'll talk about today, which is part of the DNA of Urban and Civic, is very evident at Waterbeach. But the reason for addressing your question specifically is that 2 years ago, Urban and Civic, which was previously a public company, was bought by the Wellcome Trust. So we're now part of the Wellcome family, and we are undertaking the development, not really on behalf of Wellcome Trust. We are, as I say, it's one entity, and so the commitments that you will see in the design guide are from both Wellcome Trust and from Urban and Civic. So we have that mutual symbiotic relationship which strengthens up and I hope gives further confidence to the committee in relation to the strength of those commitments and the purposefulness that we are going about things. I'm not going to go for long. It's a pretty dry document that you have, enlivened by, as was said, two Fosters, Caroline on my right and Julia on my left, who will do the presentation. But I just wanted to be here to start, just so that it was very clear as to the level of undertaking being made by both Wellcome and by Urban and Civic. I just wanted to endorse that from the outset. There was a press release made a couple of weeks ago in which we as Wellcome and Urban and Civic committed to spending several £100 million in the quite short order. James knows that it's pretty fast, the pace, but we are absolutely determined that it will be the best that it can be, and this design guide is part of that process. So with that, why don't I hand over to you?
Right. I don't know who's going to move the slides on. Thank you, Tony. So I won't spend too long on this. As has already been explained, we're going to run through essentially the role of this document within the planning process and the content of this document in an effort to...
Could you just say who you are, please?
Of course,
Thank
yes,
you.
sorry. I'm Julia Foster from David Locke Associates. We're the planning consultants supporting Urban and Civic and Wellcome on this application. So we're going to run through the content of this document and give you a flavour of what it's about. It's going to be pretty difficult for you to get your heads around it. It's a long document, it's a detailed document, it's got a lot of imagery in it, it's got a lot of word count too. So we really want to orientate you in preparation for receiving this document and considering it formally. Do you want to move on? Am I allowed to say next slide, please? That's So just as a reminder, and I'm sure a number of you were involved, outline planning permission was granted for the expansion of the Genome Campus in 2020. And that outline planning permission provides for 150,000 square metres of employment use, primarily targeted at the specifics of the science which goes on that site, the laboratory facilities that support the activity of the Wellcome Trust. A range of uses support that primary function, including 1,500 homes, which through the Section 106 agreement are dedicated to the employees on that site. So these are not normal market dwellings. There is a mechanism to maintain their occupation in relation to the site. And then a range of other supporting uses and infrastructure that you would expect with a community and a development of this scale, including provision for primary school and various other leisure and support facilities. There are 3 development areas identified in that outline planning permission, and a lot of the conditions and the structure of the consent relate to different activities in those 3 development areas. So down, left-hand side, bottom of the site, to the left, to the west of the A1301. Oh, thank you, there's a little pointer. There is a small area which is for the completion of the existing campus area, essentially. You'll know, you may well have been involved in the building that's underway and under construction at the moment, which is the first part of that completion. But we're primarily focused today on the remainder, the larger triangular expansion land, which has 2 development areas within it, DA1 and DA3, as referred to in the consent, which are the red areas on this composite parameter plan from that outline consent. Thank you, Tony. So just starting to give you a bit of a flavour of where we were and where we now are, considerable work has been done by the design team led by Tony and Andrew, who will introduce themselves in just a moment, to evolve the proposals that were illustrated as part of that outline consent. On the left-hand side there, the smaller plan is the illustrative master plan submitted in support of the outline planning permission. And that has evolved through the work we've been doing over the last year or so into the new master plan, which is sitting there on the right-hand side, the larger plan. It's very much in the vein of what was proposed at that early stage of outline, but there have been some important progressions and evolutions of that plan, and I'm just going to take a moment to work through those. The plans that were originally submitted in support of the outline assumed that the A1301, obviously a major corridor of movement through the site, would have development right up to its edge and would become an integrated part of the development. We have moved away from that approach and actually moved the development away from the corridor and introduced proposals for a really landscaped approach to the A1301 corridor, and Andrew will talk a little bit more about that later. The green, which is a focal point for the expansion land, has been shifted south slightly. On the original master plan, it was sitting slightly further north than shown on the plan here, and that's really part of the landscape strategy again in terms of building a stronger relationship across the corridor in terms of a landscape framework which relates to the historic landscape around Hinxton Hall, visual connection between the two sides of the campus. And that supports a different approach to connectivity across from the east to the west, across the 1301, which we're going to spend a little bit of time on today. We've also done some other important work to establish where key uses are going to sit within the overall master plan, one of which is the school, which is now positioned where the marker is shown there on a central green corridor within the site. And we've also moved the primary sports facilities, which include a floodlit pitch over on the eastern boundary where it will cause less impact upon existing residential areas in the village of Hinxton in particular. Next one, please, Tony. So this draws out of these key moves, these key changes from the original parameter plan on the left-hand side, just to highlight on the right-hand side that where we've made those changes, we've shifted the green, we've introduced a new movement network, and we've slightly changed the approach to the 1301. We're not radically different from what was originally conceived, but you can see there are some minor adjustments to some of the key lines on the plan there. And that's all explained in the guide, so you'll be able to trace the evolution of the plan through looking at the opening sections of the guide. Thank you, Tony. We thought it was probably worth just taking a moment to set the scene a little bit in terms of what's going on in addition and around the guide, because the guide is an important document for bringing the whole of the site-wide ambitions for the campus together. But in order to facilitate that and make sure that we've got all the jigsaw pieces in place, we've also been doing some other work which falls out of the conditions attached to the outline consent and means we catch up on some of the key infrastructure elements before we understand the implications of the guide more widely. So we've done work to bring forward detailed proposals for the 1301 corridor. You may well have seen and been involved in the applications that are on the books for those. We've also brought forward detailed proposals for two bridges to connect the two sides of the campus across the A1301. The outline had assumed a particular approach to crossing the A1301, which was focused on grade crossing. That's been evolved through this work to have two primary points of connection for pedestrian and cycle movement across two bridges. And that's an integral part of the scheme that we're going to explain through the guide today. Bringing forward a planning application for those at this point which were not part of the outline means we can then take the guide forward, bringing together the bridge application, the 1301, and each of the elements of the plan now being brought forward. We're also now beginning to think ahead to what follows from approval of the guide in terms of how we deliver the first stages of development and anticipating, and you will receive an application package which deals with substantial elements of the infrastructure, the framework for development. So much as you will have seen at Waterbeach or on other urban and civic sites, there'll be an application which deals with the green, grey and blue, as we call it, all of the landscape elements for the first phases, the primary movement network, roads, footpaths, etc., and deals with drainage and other key elements that means that sites are ready to roll for the first phases of development. And if you can just move forward, Tony, there's a plan which gives a little bit of a sense of what that means on the site. So as you might expect, we're essentially working our way out from the point of connection to the existing campus and the 1301. So you will see the arc, the red arc of the green in the middle there. And adjacent to that, you will see the anticipated first development area, which is sitting just to the north, the purple area. So that's where the first buildings will be located. And around that, a network of routes will sit within those corridors identified red. And the two key bridge connections are coming across the yellow 1301 from the landscaped area in the existing campus to connect the northern edge adjacent to that purple zone and at the southern edge from the existing campus area and entrance location you'll be familiar with. So we'll come back to that in a little bit more detail as we move on. We have a little animation just to orientate you in terms of those key elements, which I think it's going to be a little bit clunky, I think, just because of the delay on the Wi-Fi. So please imagine this running very smoothly as you wind your way through. So we're coming down onto the 1301. You can see ahead of you the Southern Bridge. On the left-hand side is the existing campus. And as a new boundary feature to that campus, there is what we're describing as a serpentine wall, which picks up the old fence line and substantially upgrades it. And then we travel north up the 1301 under a second bridge. And then we're pulling out from that bridge to look at the green. And those first buildings will be the ones on the left-hand side of the screen there. I won't steal all of the thunder for Tony and Andrew to describe some of the lovely elements associated with the green and the way we're addressing movement and car parking. We'll come back to that a little later. So just pulling out, and it's a little unfortunate you can't read the labels on this, but this is the master plan which will sit at the front of the guide and really sets the ambition for the delivery of the scheme, which will meet Wellcome's needs and meet the ambitions to really transform the existing campus into a true science community. And I know Nigel will probably want to say a little bit more about that as we move through the presentation. There are a number of elements to that which we're going to talk about some of them today, but you have to bear with us on some of the detail. But we just to give you a broad feel for the broad disposition of land uses, you have the primary science functions clustered in that arc around the green, adjacent to the 1301 and the existing campus. You have to the southern part of the site, which is actually just to confuse you on the eastern edge of this plan, on the right there, further large-scale commercial activities and critically some of the support functions which will allow those science activities to take place. So that's where some of the car parking and the utility infrastructure, data centre, all those sorts of uses are located. And then wending their way north towards the top of this plan, we have the residential areas incorporating the school and extensive landscape, which are in the two fingers which head north from the core of the science area. And we'll come back to that again later. Just in the foreground, it's worth saying that you can see those rows of trees, which may look a little odd compared to the previous master plan, which had open fields in those locations. We're introducing the concept of agroforestry there, and again, Andrew will come back to the detail of that later. So I think we can move on. Caroline, I think you're just going to say a few words about the sustainability principles underpinning the guide.
Caroline welcome. We, of course, many of us have met you before, but if you would again just introduce yourself before.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Caroline Foster. I'm the Development Director for Urban and Civic, leading the campus expansion project. Thank you. And thanks, Julia. I guess just to start by saying, Wellcome place an especially high priority on sustainability on this development. As you can see, they've adopted a target to reach net zero carbon for their entire investment portfolio by 2050. And you know, through the guide, when you receive it, you'll see that Urban and Civic has actually established stretch targets to surpass policy for this development. And we've actually developed our own internal toolkits to make sure that we are monitoring and recording data at every step of the development to make sure that we are on track to achieve these targets. Some of the key targets that you can see on the screen in front of you also surpass the outline planning requirements. We will have all electric buildings, decarbonisation, and renewable energy will use an ambient loop to share heat across the buildings with ground source heat pumps and solar PV panels as well. We've introduced, as Julia said, an agroforestry scheme, a tree retention scheme, and our biodiversity net gain target has actually increased from the outline consent, which was a target of 10%. In our design guide, we're already committing to increasing that minimum target to 25%. I think, if we just go to the next slide, sorry, Tony. Oh, is it slow? No problem. Again, you can't see the detail on the screen, obviously, but I think in summary, our approach to sustainability here is not just to minimize the environmental impact of the development. It's about actively improving the environment and really making it a new community from day one, and making sure that we do this in the right way. So working with local residents, local villages, making sure that we're focused on sustainable travel hubs, active travel routes for the community to use. The school that sits in a car-free zone, just as we did at Water Beach, making sure that we create a safe space for children getting to the school. I won't go through all of these because they're quite difficult to see, so we'll keep moving on. Thanks, Tony. Just as a very brief update on where we are, Julia mentioned the bridge application, so we have revised the design to remove those at-grade crossings, creating these safer routes across 2 landscape bridges, thinking about the movement network to ensure that reaches into the wider community and the local villages. We have brought forward the Thornton Building Reserve Matters that is now coming out of the ground already. That's on the existing campus, and alongside about 7 acres of new landscaping beside that. And we have done all the archaeology and usual pre-commencement conditions and strategies that you would expect to be discharged and submitted at this stage. I think we'll keep going if that's okay, Tony. One of the most important things that we really focused on, especially when we came to site since our involvement about a year or two ago, is looking at how we protect the views for the local community from day one. So you can see here we have very specifically 919 trees that have actually been translocated that I know that Andrew will talk a little bit more about, but to make sure that we are protecting the views for Hinxton Village from day one and planting another 1,000+ trees beside that. So that's all work already underway, just to make sure that we're setting the scene and thinking about our local community. And perhaps, Andrew, you can talk a little bit more about the tree and the trees and planting.
Good morning, Andrew Thornhill, landscape architect for the project. Thank you, Caroline. So just to say and to broaden what we've been doing over the last 4 months. So as Caroline described, there are 919 trees that have been translocated. These trees vary in size from 4 to 5 meters up to some of them in excess of 8 meters in height. So it's been a significant undertaking. And what that has done is actually established immediately the landscape mitigation that was set out under the outline consent. And I think it really does speak of the commitment that Urban and Civic are bringing to this project. And that was possible by allowing us to evaluate the assets that were on site when we arrived to the project. So looking at the woodland belt that was planted under a woodland grant scheme some 20 years ago, provided the optimum size trees to enable that transplantation. And we'll continue to use them as a resource as the project progresses. So wherever we can, we're going to be using the trees that have been growing on the site already and then supplementing them with many thousands more as well to achieve the biodiversity net gain. We have an image here to illustrate what's happened. So this is looking at the northernmost section of the Westland woodland. There's a detention basin that forms some of the early groundworks for the sod system that has been integrated into the scheme. And you can see there the scale of planting. So they'll be supplemented with younger trees to create a more layered woodland. And so we have multi-age specimens developing. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm really not going to spend too long on the next few slides because this is the tedious bit. But the outline planning permission, the conditions required 2 forms of document to be produced before we move on to reserve matters applications. One's a development area brief and one is a design guide. And there's quite a bit of flexibility in the way those conditions are framed as to how we use those documents to help the process. So I just wanted to get across to you today that we have, in consultation with the officers, elevated the design guide to be the kind of site-wide framework for the development as a whole. I'll come back to what that means in a moment in terms of its content. And then we're going to use development briefs for smaller parts of the site as we begin to do the detailed design and we can anticipate what's going to come forward. So if you can get into your minds that the design guide is kind of an overarching umbrella document to really drive the quality and the ambition for the scheme as a whole, and the area briefs will be the mechanism to coordinate development in detail, how buildings and landscape and movement will come together in smaller parts of the site. I think we can probably move on a couple of slides, Tony, and I'll pick up these things in the content of the document. I suppose it's probably just worth saying as well that this approach is really helpful to delivery, and it's kind of a tried and tested approach that UNC have used. So we have this framework that comes from looking at the site as a whole that means we can leave lots of flexibility around what happens in individual development parcels. And because we don't know exactly what the needs of the science community are going to be, what the nature of those buildings are going to be, what the mix of uses actually is going to end up, because we're responding to a very dynamic sector, we've got lots of flexibility to come back to those through the development briefs and through the reserve matters at a later date. So it's a good delivery tool from a delivery financial point of view. Thanks, Tony. So just to reinforce that point, this is the cascade of material you will be seeing and will be asked to opine on. So you've got your outline. We've got a series of site-wide strategies that were approved as part of the outline, things like drainage strategy. And then you will have this site-wide design guide coordinating across the site as a whole, then individual development briefs alongside reserve matters applications, and then we'll get on and build. Thanks, Tony. Just to give you a sense of where we've been over the last year or more, we've obviously been working on this document for quite some time, alongside the other elements that we've talked about, worked closely with the officers at the councils, county council and district. This document was subject to panel review just a few weeks ago, and that was a really valuable exercise, and we were blessed because we were able to do that over 2 days rather than a few hours, which is the normal approach, and we got the quality panel up to Hinxton and did that on site with officers and the team. So it was a very involved, detailed discussion, and we've yet to take on board all of their comments and feedback, but it was a very constructive exercise. And we've also been working hard in the community and through the formal mechanisms that have been set up to liaise with the community. We have a formal community liaison group. We've been introducing these concepts and ideas and the content of this document in principle to them, and we'll be doing more of that as we bring it forward through the process. Thanks, Tony. So to the document itself, it is a slightly unusual document. It's something of a hybrid of a design code that you will be familiar with and a higher level, more strategic design guide. It has a kind of a consistent structure which we've sought to adopt to make the document as accessible as possible. It has a key plan, which we'll come on to in a moment, which is a framework plan, and that will be a compliance plan. So anything that follows from this document will be expected to comply with what's set out on that plan. And that provides a key to a series of sections within the document, which set out requirements. Again, compliance requirements, these are mandatory elements which are set out as musts and shoulds, as you would be familiar with from a design code. But then here also quite a lot of elements are subject to a steer through guidance rather than necessarily being prescriptive to the degree that you would see in a design code. And then also lots of precedent images to give a flavour of what's anticipated and what we hope design teams will respond to as they bring forward individual elements. So the document itself sets out those elements by referring back to the outline principles and objectives in blue boxes, setting new mandatory requirements in pink boxes, and then using lots of illustrations and plans, as you would expect, to help interpret and understand those provisions. Thanks, Tony. I think we can probably move on to the framework plan. I'm just conscious of time and leaving plenty of opportunity for questions. You won't be able to make head and tail at this scale, but you're going to have to take my word for it. This is quite a detailed key plan, which has got a very long key attached to it. So each and every component of the scheme, as addressed in the guide, is identified on this plan in order to use this as a reference for the content of what is quite a weighty document. So this is the spatial application of all the principles that are set out within the document. You'll need to scrutinise this in a little bit more detail when we can get a form of the document in front of you. So I'm going to hand over to Tony and Andrew to just give you a bit of a sense of the sorts of design elements that are addressed in the document and how that's been approached.
Thanks, Julia. I'm Tony Musson. I'm from Wilkinson Air Architects, and we're the master planners for the site. So as Julia said, the design guide is broken into a series of chapters, focusing initially on structuring elements, and the first of those is to do with the sort of foundations for the site, focusing in on landform and sustainable drainage. So landform itself is guided, or it has a series of requirements related to it which come from the outline, and they are to do with the amount of change to the existing profile of the site and also building heights across the site. So that's all enshrined in the outline planning consent. And so this document responds to that, reiterates those points, and then it also explains some of the refinements to that we've made in terms of the way the landscape has evolved around the green. We're lifting the levels slightly to relate to the two bridges and also to conceal some below ground car parking. And also the refinements to the acoustic bunds that were proposed on the eastern edge of the site along the A11 in order to make them more accessible and more sympathetic to the existing landform.
So then, building on that, we looked at the blue and green infrastructure and have set out some very clear parameters as to where each of those provisions are to be interconnected and relate to each other in order to sustain the green infrastructure that we spoke about earlier, and that will be planted in the forthcoming years. So you can see here on this diagram how effectively all of the site's sustainable urban drainage requirements are provided within these key blue infrastructure moves, and then the plots will be able to contribute to that in terms of filtration and cleansing of the water, so that the aquifer below will receive water from the site, and there's no additional load placed into the surrounding network. The next slide here then gives you an example of some of the detail that's contained within the guide. So this is not every section that we're going to run through, but this provides you an example of how we've used a combination of illustrations, precedent images, and sections to set out the musts and the shoulds to enable this blue infrastructure to contribute to the recreational aspects of the site and also, importantly, the ecology as well. So rather than having purely engineered sustainable urban drainage features, these are very much designed with a landscape perspective in mind. And then some of the sort of narrative elements, such as the use of winterborne streams, which would be familiar with those of you that are familiar with chalk geology, emerge in the winter months and provide some animation within the landscape.
So the second set of structuring elements which sit over the top of the foundations is the framework, and that relates to the principal uses of the land across the site, the landscape and the movement, and these really are the primary sort of structuring elements for the development as it comes forward. In relation to land use, we have 4 principal zones. The sort of inner blue, light blue area is the commercial research and translation uses, and these are predominant uses, so there is flexibility in the guide to how these might be adapted and create mixed use in some of the parcels as well. Moving out, and so that's focused around the green and the primary street, and then moving out to predominantly residential uses in the northern parts of DA1 and in development area 3. The uses also within the outline consent allow for some the sort of supporting uses to do with site infrastructure, car parking and things like that, and we've located those towards the eastern edge of the site. And the other move that's changed slightly since outline is the sort of core integration of the school use within one of the development areas.
This next slide then shows how the landscape has been set out to support those key moves in terms of where the housing and commercial space is provided. You can see here from this diagram how we have a combination of natural and semi-natural green space fringing the development, forming the eastern ridge, which is the buffer that we spoke about earlier to the A11, and the western woodland, which sits in between Hinxton village and the emerging housing scheme to the north of the site. This is then augmented with some park and garden, which takes more of the recreational capacity of the site and extends down into the green that we spoke about earlier and makes a positive connection to the landscape character of Hinxton Hall and the campus as it exists at the moment. We also have the retained agricultural field shown on the northwest side of this diagram. And here we've been working with our client to develop the concept of agroforestry. There are some really good examples in North Cambridge that have been established over a number of years, and we have the opportunity here to progress a similar model to return the land to a productive but more ecologically focused form of farming.
That's very helpful. I'm very keen to ensure that we do give members a little bit of time to ask you some questions. So if we could perhaps start to draw this to a conclusion, that would be helpful.
Sure, perhaps we'll just cover movement and then we'll pause, shall we? I think the second layer, in addition to landscape, is movement, and we've thought and worked with officers on a considerable kind of review of the wider movement network, so drawing in the surrounding parishes and villages, and thinking about how that relates then to the new movement network that we will provide on the site. So this is a kind of heat map that shows the intensity of use and the key destinations across the movement network. And a core part of that is the way that the bridges relate to connecting into the site and connecting the two different sides of the site. This little animation is quite helpful and it shows those kind of broader connections. So the first consideration is the campus connections, so bringing the two sides of the expanded campus together, then bringing that out to the villages and the wider connectivity to the community so they can come into the site and use some of the facilities proposed, including access to the school in a safe and effective way, as well as some of the other wider landscape improvements across the site. And then there's also a broader connection beyond that out into the existing landscape, both on the existing campus to the wetlands to the west, and then also more widely into the broader landscape that will be created on the expansion land. And then the bridges themselves are, as I said, a core component of that connectivity. So this is just a couple of views that show the intent, and these are included in the planning application for the bridges. This is the view of the northern bridge looking along the A1301. These are not standard bridges, they are landscapes. They have integrated landscape and planting across them. They provide step, lift and ramp access up from the existing campus and then deliver people directly into the two kind of key gateway nodes of the proposed expansion land. And this is a view of the southern bridge at the bridge deck level as you come up on the ramp and looking across towards the expansion land. So we can probably pause there.
Yeah, I thought in response to your questions, if you wanted to raise any at this point.
The Again, apologies, this will be a little bit jerky because of the connection, but this is an animation prepared, and I think what the intent of this is just to show how we are already starting to think about how the contents of the guide affect or influence what we are bringing forward as part of the first phase infrastructure and some of the planning applications which have already been submitted. So this shows the A1301 corridor. Yes, correct. Yeah. So we're coming towards the sort of centre, the middle between the two roundabouts here. This is turning in towards the landscape terraces, which we're starting to develop as part of the eastern edge of the A1301. You can see here how that level is lifted up across this front edge of the site, and we're tucking in a layer of car parking. It's not really a basement, it's like a sort of undercroft. So that car park sits on the core of the site, so it will help support the site as it develops out from that centre. And then it's a very different sort of car park. It has openings, it's got trees planted at both levels, and then you come up through some of those openings to the level of the green. Slowly. And into some of the landscape which Andrew and his team are starting to design at that green level. You can see in the background here some of those buildings that sit around that inner arc of the centre of the site.
I think you can also see the sense of the scale of the landscaping that's proposed on that deck that will then blend seamlessly into the green to the east side. And it's proposed to have a series of 23 display gardens or lab gardens, as we call them, for an evolving kind of horticultural display of the scientific endeavours that take place on the campus.
So, Chair, if I can just finish off, we've spent time on the spatial elements. They've, I think, been brought out very clearly. There are two other aspects. One is which we did allude to briefly, but the encouraging of the wider community and the links within that, both the physical links, but also this second point, which is axiomatic to what we've been doing, which is encouraging serendipity. If you think about, I mean, Hinxton, the Wellcome Genome Campus at Hinxton is literally is producing work of world-class significance. It has world-class scientists there. And the nature of scientific research is essentially collaborative. It's not individual, they work in teams. So the encouragement of serendipity has been fundamental to it. People coming together have been fundamental to the way that we've approached things. And it's within you'll see it's within the design guide. And one of the really strong elements which brings the two together, both the broader community and the encouraging of interrelationships on the campus, is within that first phase a very large health and fitness centre. So we're going to build, and we'll probably build the only new swimming pool in the UK in the next 5 years, but that swimming pool will be heated from the data centre. So there is this revolver, so all of those things. We spent a lot of time with the design panel talking through those elements. So when I say that it will be the best that that we can possibly make it, it's thinking through these other broader connections and growing the campus in the way that it's already successful, but as was envisaged in the original outline, to consolidate the position of a world-class research centre. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you all very much for that presentation. I think at the beginning I failed to welcome Helen Pearson-Flett, is that right? Yeah, well, very welcome to be here as well. You haven't had an opportunity to introduce yourself, but your presence is appreciated. Now, before we proceed to members' questions, I just want to say that the document you refer to will contain a lot more detail, some of which we've seen in the notes, which, as you said, we couldn't read. And I think you said it'll be more of a guide than a code. I just want to reassure members who are perhaps at home fumbling through their inboxes, we haven't seen this yet. We will no doubt see it shortly. I'm now going to proceed to members' questions. Those online will forgive me. I want to take members in the room first. But before I do that, I'll just come to Peter MacDonald as local member, whether you wanted to ask the first question. Can I just say to you and to anyone else thinking of making a comment, which would be reasonable, just bear in mind the wise words we had from our senior legal advisor at the start. Peter, did you want to go first?
Thanks, Chair. Appreciate that. And thanks to the Wellcome team and all the presentations. I've been involved as local member in the interactions with most of the parishes, so certainly with Hinxton, I think with Duxford, with Ickleton. Caroline will remind me of others that I've missed. So from Hinxton's point of view, which is the nearest community, obviously this is the biggest thing that's going to happen in their community for the next 25 years. Although it's not directly related to the design guide, and therefore it's probably not appropriate for today, obviously this is a construction program that is going to take place over 10 years. And so there are things both with my county hat on and the district hat on that I have to think about, you know, for the local community as that process moves forward. But coming back to the design guide, I think, you know, I've been involved in the gestation leading up to outline planning permission and then to this stage. I think many elements of the design guide are very high standard. They're very innovative. When we look at the 1301, the village, Hinxton in particular does have concern about the two bridges. Why are two bridges necessary? I'm sure Caroline and the team would say because because of the size of the site and the requirement to have a northern and a southern access. Because part of I think the northern access is bringing people to the site essentially for the residential development, and the southern bridge is largely from the community centre and some of the other buildings on the southern part of the site. So I think that the Wellcome is to be complimented on what it's done in terms of the tree movement. Was it 919? Did I remember the number correctly? It's a pretty huge number. And, you know, they're to be congratulated, I think, on that. I'm sure all of you in the room, you know, going forward will have questions around sustainability, especially with water, because it's a huge site. And I know that the team have given that quite a bit of thought, and there were a lot of questions on that from the local parishes, the local communities here. I think the final thing to say is that you know, overall, the community does welcome what the campus is trying to do. It's aware of, as Nigel said, the world-class work that is going on there. And they are very keen, you know, as much as possible to participate and support, so long as they're, you know, kept informed during the process. And a couple of other things, but I'd like to pause there, if that's okay, Chair, and then maybe come back later on.
Thank you, Peter, that's fine. Just to say that, of course, you're speaking as local member, therefore have a little more flexibility in what you say than those of us who anticipate being a member of the planning committee in due course. Did you want to comment, any of your team, on what Peter MacDonald has just said? Good, okay. Well, then I will move first to questions in the room. And I have here the order, I think, will be Councillor Anna Bradnam, Councillor Dr. Richard Williams, and then Councillor Martin Khan. If I could ask members to keep their questions fairly brief if possible. Thank you.
Thank you,
Councillor
Chair.
Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much to the whole team for giving us a very interesting presentation. So I, at the moment, have around about 4 questions, but the first one is, if this design code it's a combination of guidance and mandatory requirements, I wanted to understand what is your understanding about what weight that will carry in planning terms in due course. I appreciate it's your guidance for how you commence and plan the strategy for the site, but I wanted to understand, will it carry any weight in planning terms? On a more, looking at the design of the arrangements, you know, I welcome that, what I wanted to ask was, will the arc, which you've described as the green, be able to be used for any kind of community activity? Or if not, where will community activity for the residents of this new development have their community space? It became apparent that the 2 bridges that you've planned are landscaped, so clearly they're for walking and cycling. But obviously there was a further crossing of the A1301, which went into the Undercroft car park, and I just wanted to understand what consideration has been given to the transport network in that area with regard to that crossing, because it looked in your plan like an at-grade crossing, but I wonder whether, given that that's a very busy road, whether there might need to be some traffic management there. And the 4th thing for the time being was the translocated trees. I just wanted to ask, given that some of those must have been translocated during summer 2022, I just wondered, I imagine not all of them will have survived because it was so hot and dry. I just wondered, will you have an ongoing programme of replacement of those? Thank you.
Okay, well, I think I'll start with the easy one. In relation to the green, that's absolutely designed as an external space for both the campus and the broader community. And in addition, there are inside community facilities which are additional to the existing Hinxton provision. So the answer to that is that yes, and absolutely, it goes to this fundamental point. The green is both encouraging serendipity with the scientists, but also helping bring together the broader community in the way we discussed before. Do you want to just do planning status?
Yes, absolutely. This document will have weight within the decision-making process. So it's a requirement of the planning conditions on the outline that this is brought forward and approved before reserve matters. And we are setting this document up to be a design tool which you and the officers will use as a check, really, for what comes before you following that. And we will be using this document to take to design teams as part of their engagement on each of the parcels that come forward, to say these are the parameters within which you must design. So it's dual purpose, and it's written for that purpose. It will be very clear that there is this cascade of approval necessary to get to reserve matters before you can then actually bring development forward.
Andrew, do you just want to do translocated trees and Caroline can do the road?
Yep. So on the translocated trees, we started the work in November last year, so we missed the summer period. We've had optimum conditions so far this spring. We couldn't have asked for a wetter spring. And whilst we hope that the sun does come out, there is a 5-year management plan in place to ensure the watering and success of those trees. So we're hoping for a very high success rate. Any that do fail will be viewed on whether or not we've maintained a screen sufficient to satisfy the planning requirements on that, and then there'll be supplementary planting as required, as you'd expect. But the management is intended to help ensure success.
On the transport side, yeah, absolutely. So you did see obviously one at-grade crossing on that last animation. That has been part of the feedback and the work we've been doing with the County Council in terms of movement to keep one. There was originally actually 6 at-grade crossings. So the introduction, yes, between the 2 roundabouts, the outline design had 6. So hence the introduction of the 2 bridges. We're conscious of the scale of the development and the population of the development when fully built out, which is why we have proposed 2. I think in terms of wider traffic management, whilst the 106 has an obligation in a couple of years' time to put in some AMPR, we're actually accelerating that and working with the county on that scheme now. As you know, we've done that elsewhere. We're very keen to make sure that we use that data to understand the behaviours of residents, understand our movement network, and also use that data to actually make some really smart investments and understand what's working, what's not working, where we need to look at movement differently or further investment in public transport. So yes, absolutely something we're working on right now.
Follow-up question for you. Yes, Councillor Madden.
Thank you, Chair. That brings into mind, that was why I was asking that question. It's a very busy road already, and this site will, I know the whole purpose of putting a large residential area is to reduce the incoming and outgoing employee movements. So I just wondered whether you are considering also, in addition, any kind of travel plan, you know, in order to bring other people who don't live on site into the site.
Yes, absolutely. It's something we're working on. Transport links at the moment in the area are not great. I think there definitely needs to be wider focus on strategic transport in the area. But in terms of what we can do, yes, the campus has a very successful bus service at the moment. Over 50% of their staff are currently using the buses provided. So that's something we want to look at how we scale up so that we can offer it to new tenants. It's a point that was raised at the recent parish council meeting on how we can make those buses more accessible for local communities to use as well. So very much something we're looking at the moment. Yeah.
Before we move on to others, can I just ask you to clarify, maybe I've missed this, the sustainable links with Whittlesford Station in particular?
So the connections to Whittlesford, the first piece of work that we have through the recent planning consent, is the improvement on the A1301. So once we have received technical approval from the County Council, any moment, we will commence works probably in the autumn, maybe September, October time, to create new cycle pedestrian connections along the A1301 that will connect up to, including a crossing on the A505 that will connect up to Whittlesford. We are also looking at a scheme that would connect, improve connectivity to the village and look at off-road connections to the campus as well. We're keen to find as many routes as possible for our staff, our campus employees to connect into public transport, and we certainly don't want to be building car parks here. So a big focus on those connections, both to Whittlesford but also to Greater Chesterford as well.
Councillor Dr. Richard Williams.
Thank you very much. Just if I can make my first comment as a local member for Whittlesford, I think it would be the parish council would very much welcome hearing from you in terms of those the things you just outlined in terms of links to the station. So if it would be possible to arrange a briefing for the parish council, I think that would be very much appreciated. My questions are in various ways actually relating back to the transport issues. I think it's already been made clear that the A1301 is a very sensitive road, particularly the junction with the 505. We've had a lot of problems recently with some traffic management measures that have been put in there, so that's obviously an issue of local concern. But in terms of this document, I was just wondering, are we going to get details on the housing mix and tenure for the proposed residential housing? Because that's going to be quite crucial in terms of the extent to which having the housing on the site does minimise trip generation. Because I mean, I think you said earlier that the housing would be in some way linked to people who work at the site. So I suppose the attractiveness of that housing and the mix of housing in terms of whether families can sort of live there or whether it's going to be more flats and housing for single people, I think could be quite important in terms of the impact it has on trip generation. So I was just wondering if we'll get information in this document on the housing mix and a bit more on the tenure. Just in terms of, on that as well, you mentioned a swimming pool earlier and some community facilities. Would they be open to local communities, or would they be restricted to people with a link to the site? Because obviously, again, that's another potential trip generation issue, but also an issue of interest to local people, given that there are no swimming pools nearby. So I'd welcome a bit more information on that if we can get it. And then just very, very finally, a very micro question. In terms of the green, which is raised, and obviously it's got the undercroft, I noticed on the animations there were sort of trees and things. Obviously, those trees are not going to be able to set down very deep roots if there's a car park underneath. So will we get the sort of level of detail of how that area would be irrigated so it doesn't become a bit of a dry wasteland?
Andrew, why don't you do the last one first, and then we'll pick up the others.
Okay. So the detail that's enshrined in the guidance and is emerging in the sort of detailed design studies that we're doing at the moment covers exactly that point. So we've ensured that we have between 800 and 1,000 millimetres of soil, so that's sufficient for most trees to root adequately and at the depth that they would expect to in the natural ground. Below that, we have a sustainable urban drainage system which attenuates stormwater that falls onto the site and actually holds it in place to use as a passive irrigation as well. So the trees and planting will be watered from below, which is the most efficient. It avoids loss through evaporation as well, so we're utilising as much of the rainwater that falls on the site as we possibly can to sustain that landscape. So it is a very sustainable approach, and it has the right amount of soil to make it resilient to climate change as well. Just to reassure you on that.
So I'll just do your question in relation to the swimming pool and the health. It is true that technically you could see that as a trip generator, but it's much more important as bringing things together to the broader community. It's absolutely open for community use. And part of the reason for, Councillor MacDonald mentioned that Hinxton Village had only suggested one bridge. Part of the reason we want two is in order to encourage walking and cycling and those non-car uses to what will certainly be a very considerable community attraction. I think it's not just the fact there isn't a swimming pool nearby. The health and fitness centre will be to welcome standards, and so I can promise you that it will be very, very strong, and I think it will and it will be a part of that broader globe. It's both for the campus and for the broader area. Do you want to just do housing next?
Yeah, it's an interesting aspect to this scheme because it's really quite unconventional to bring forward housing in this way, and it's more akin to university student type housing in terms of the concept of how it will function in relation to the primary use. We have quite a degree of flexibility in terms of the outline consent, but since the work was done at that stage, we know now that the housing is going to be brought forward, owned and controlled by Wellcome, so it won't be open market housing. And that means that we can take a very specific and targeted approach to what's needed. And I understand that the first housing elements will be for Emble on site at present, so we know exactly what the needs are.
Do you also say a little bit about the surveys that have already been taken and the specific nature of them?
Thank you. So we are carrying out surveys, as Nigel mentioned, to make sure that we understand the existing need on the campus. So we want to make sure we get the balance right in creating a new community with family housing, but also thinking about the needs of organisations on campus like Emble EBI, who have a lot of short-term requirements for international visiting scientists, shorter term, or PhD students that are working on the campus and studying. So there's a real mix of need at the moment. What we're trying to do is make sure that the first buildings that you'll see in the design guide bring forward that short-term mix, so a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, And then the next separate application will bring forward more family homes so that we start to really build that longer term community. Scattered through that, of course, will be our affordable housing provision set out in the outline, where we have each of the different tenures, which are quite interesting because they are obviously linked to income levels and also giving the opportunity for sharers as well for different income levels on the campus employment.
It's probably important to say that the document does not contain a huge amount of detail on what that mix overall or that need is likely to be. So we have a degree of design specification in here to the way that the residential areas will be laid out, but it will be through the development briefs that we can actually target what the needs are at that given moment, depending on who's coming forward onto the site to take the commercial space. And there is, in the Section 106 agreement, there's this link between the delivery of the housing alongside the occupation of the commercial. So there is that tie across to what needs actually are, rather than having to try and anticipate what they are now.
Chair, just to finish that off, although clearly it's, as Julie says, not in the document, there's a direct alignment in that we are able to target very specifically the needs of the, and hear the needs of the site, and therefore by definition it goes back to reducing trips because they are all for people working on the campus.
Right, I'm next going to ask Vice Chair Councillor Khan to ask his question. Just to clarify, we have on the list Councillor Bill Hanley, Councillor Peter Sanford. Online, we have now Councillor Brian Milne and Councillor Heather Williams. Can I just say that some may be using the chat column to put themselves in the list. We may not be monitoring that, I'm not sure. Yes, we are. Yes, okay. So, Councillor Khan.
Okay, couple of points. I wanted to ask really about the scooters and the use of the internal movement network. I mean, it's obvious that while they may not be legal on the roads, they're expanding at a rapid rate, and it's almost inevitable that you're going to have quite a lot of use of that. Has the system been designed in terms of use of electric and scooter-type traffic as well, and how do you plan to manage it? Being a private network, in any case, there wouldn't be the same legal restrictions that would be on a public road. So I just wondered what you thought about that. So, number one. Secondly, you talk about having exercise and a sports centre to get people to communicate and to join groups. But there's no mention of a cultural centre or a community centre and cultural activities, which are in some ways may be easier to get people to talk to each other than actually when they're running or doing hard physical exercise. And considering the market that you're going to be going for, there's probably going to be quite a large interest in that. What had you thought about in terms of that, in terms of your design? Thirdly, in the woodland regeneration, the new woodlands, virtually all the woodland on site is secondary. There's an old railway line there, which is unusual. It was only ever used for 2 years. I don't think I've known one other temporary railway line that shortly used in the 1850s. So it's secondary woodland, and there won't be the full undergrowth or underground canopy on the site. What you thought about doing that to try and increase the interest of the woodland?
Tony, if you do scooters in first instance of the bridge, then Andrew and then Caroline can pick up the other question.
Thanks, Nigel. So yes, the movement network does support a range of different types, and that will be developed in further detail in the future. The size of the bridges and the size of the network is designed for both use by pedestrians and other modes of transport. And there's also a network of sustainable travel hubs proposed across the site, which will be the location for schemes to pick up a bike, to pick up a scooter, things like that. So there are key locations around the site to feed into that movement network. So whether you're travelling from home to work or coming into the site or whatever, they're there to support that movement as well.
Sorry, just to pick up on that point as well. So in terms of how we manage, obviously, as you said, it will be a private management, and we're working with the current estates teams to make sure that we are putting in place processes and protocols and policies and make sure that we can deliver that safely. We've spent a lot of time, as Tony said, looking at the sizing of routes and bridges to really encourage active travel. But we're also thinking about you know, people that have accessibility issues and challenges, and making sure that our bridges could have, you know, a kind of golf buggy size passing each other, to make sure that we're thinking about the wider community as well. So yes, a lot of time is going into making sure all of those aspects are considered. Did you want to pick up the...
Yeah. On the existing woodland, the sort of primary woodland as you described, you're quite right. There's an established canopy to the north cutting, all of which is to be preserved within this design guidance and subsequent detailed stages. The southern cutting has a more varied structure. Ecologically, they're both of interest, and they are being supplemented by the planting proposals that you'll see set out in this design guidance. So where we are looking to introduce woodland edge, so we are diversifying the canopy, supporting scrub planting as well, so that we're really maximising the biodiversity opportunity. It's a real asset, actually, the north cutting. I hadn't realised it was just 2 years that it was in use for, but left quite a mark. Yeah. Thank you.
And just to pick up your final question on the community and cultural spaces as well. So yes, it's a short answer. I get asked a lot of questions on campus already about having facilities for cultural events. It probably won't be in the detail of the guide and the exact location. You'll see a very clear location on the illustrative master plan and the design guide, highlighting the health and well-being and leisure facilities. And then you'll also see the southern gateway cluster of buildings that includes some of the research and translation spaces coming forward in the first phase. As part of that, there will be further community spaces and cultural spaces. So that's all forms part of the first phase as well. We are looking in detail with officers at the moment on the appropriate locations for those. Absolute commitment to bring it forward in very early, the very first buildings, and alongside that, looking to start the process with Hinxton Parish Council, which Peter will know, to look at the improvements to the village hall there as well. So the idea is that these various community spaces will all be delivered very early in different locations.
I'd just add that the guide does encourage quite active ground floor uses around the green, so there's hope for cafe and restaurant and other things that may sit underneath those sites and commercial activities above. And as was mentioned before, Andrew's very carefully designing the event space in the green so that, you know, we can fit a marquee, we can have pop-up activities going on in that space. It's supplied with power. You can get a vehicle to it to unload a marquee and all the rest of it. So a big aspect of that is actually things going on in the open spaces as much as within the buildings.
Before I call Councillor Bill Handley, can I just check? I had intended that we would aim to wind this up about 12:30. I don't know what your availability is. It looks to me as though we might have to go on a little bit after that, if you're happy to do so. Thank you.
Chair, we're here for as long as you're here.
That's appreciated. And in the usual way, members will indicate if, as a result, they would like us to have a short break. Councillor Bill Handley.
Thank you, Chair. This is clearly an important point in the project. A lot more. We're seeing detail now that we haven't seen before. I just wondered if you could tell us what plans you have to communicate with parish councils, other residents, the wider residents in Hinxton and other nearby settlements, and indeed anyone who might be affected by this project at all. I think it's really important, isn't it, that they get the opportunity to ask questions too.
Caroline, that's for you.
Sorry. Yes, absolutely. We are, and we're spending a lot of time with the local community. So at the moment, I think Julia mentioned earlier, within the 106, there was a community liaison group that has been established. That includes the 4 parishes of Hinxton, Ickleton, Great Chesterford and Duxford. So every quarter we meet with the 4 parishes together. As well as that, every quarter we have been holding, I think we've done 3 or 4 now, with all of the residents. So we invite all Hinxton residents, obviously being the closest to the development. So we've been inviting everybody from the village to come and meet with us quarterly to talk through all of these plans. So we have already done a session on the design guide and what that means and the principles within the guide. And we'll be doing a further page turn, I think, later this afternoon, actually, with Hinxton Parish Council as well. We've also joined each of the 4 parish council meetings. I think Hinxton we've been to twice now. We're very aware of their concerns on transport, so working with them on that. So that is very much part of this. We want the local community to feel the benefit of the facilities and the amenities that we're bringing forward here as well as the green space. I think another example of that is, we know that coming up in about 2 weeks' time, we have, I think, about 4 or 5 weeks of roadworks happening to create new construction access and to do some trial hose. And so we've been very active in trying to communicate that. We're doing door drops, not just to Hinxton, but also to the local village of Sawston, for example, because we know some of the trial hose will go up a little bit further past that roundabout. And we just want to make sure they have our contact details, numbers, email addresses to be able to contact us directly if there's any challenges. So yeah, absolutely actively trying to be part of that local community as the campus has been for some time. But I do take the point that actually Councillor Williams raised today that Whittlesford, we have probably not spent much time there, so we're going to rectify that and come and see you also. But yeah, I mean, always happy to join any other events or meetings that people feel will be beneficial.
Councillor Peter Somerville.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask for clarification on the process we're following? Is the guide coming before us to review and comment, to approve, or just to note? And also, will there be updates and iterations for us to look at in future, please?
I wonder whether that's one that perhaps I would ask James Tipping to answer.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the design guides, the next steps is that it will be finalised over the coming weeks, and then it will be formally submitted for determination, and that will be part of the consultation process. There will be, I expect, some amendments as part of that process as well, and then it will come to members, to planning committee to make a determination on that particular design guide.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that completes questions within the room for the moment. I'll now move to those with us online. I have Councillor Brian Milton first, and then Councillor Heather Williams. I don't know whether Councillor Lisa Rudrup or Councillor Khan, Ariel Khan, have any questions. I don't see nothing in the chat. No, it's not compulsory. Councillor Brian Milton.
Yeah, thanks for today. Very interesting to see the developments. I was on the planning committee, I think, when we gave outline permission. So interested in the changes since then. I'm interested to note that you've got the agroforestry area, and I wonder, is that all going to be used by an existing tenant farmer, or is a new tenancy with somebody with that experience? Because obviously it's relatively new, a new development, I think. So interested in that. My second question was really covered by Anna Bradnam, and I think I'm really interested in this tree translocation, as it's such a contentious area. You'll remember with the A14, we got very few of the trees that were planted by Highways England, or National Highways as they are now, because there was no maintenance. So I was very pleased to hear that you've got a maintenance programme for them. But I'd also be quite interested in using it as a case study for wider adoption. And the last one was slightly parochial. I used to have little bike trips with the family and use the path that went to the west of the site. And it would come out back onto the 1301. I just wondered whether that, I didn't quite catch it from the diagrams, whether there was going to be a perimeter path, including that existing one. Thank you.
Caroline, why don't you do the first one, the last one first, and then we'll Andrew for the rest of it.
Do you mean the path outside the site, the public right-of-way to the south of the existing campus, or?
So there's a footpath that goes from the Hinxton Village road junction, goes through a gate, goes alongside the railway and river, and then used to come out, yes, onto the 1301. But obviously there's a different configuration of all that space, and I just wondered whether there was an intention to do a perimeter, right, including that all the way around the entire site.
So yes, absolutely. We're looking at perimeter links and leisure routes across the development. So the path that you referred to, so we're looking at that to obviously make sure we have the connectivity in place for Hinxton Village and for the community to use. That goes right through the very beautiful existing 15-acre wetlands as well. And we're adding in a small pedestrian bridge as well, so that people can then do a full loop around, cross over the bridges and go back up and do the perimeter of the expansion as well. So we're really focused on looking at obviously those connections between, you know, for work from the research buildings to homes and amenities, but also making sure that we get those leisure routes right. So yes, absolutely, yeah.
Right. Chair, I mean, this goes to the point that there has been a very considerable investment by Wellcome already, particularly in the wetlands over the years. And what we want to try and just do is build on that in exactly the way that the councillor described. Do you want to pick up the other one?
Yeah, so if I may describe where we've got to in terms of the agroforestry concept, you're quite right. It is fairly novel still for existing tenant farmers. Currently, the proposal set out an approach that would enable the adjoining tenant farmer whose tenancy for the land obviously expired last year, as Wellcome took it on as a development site. But the spacing of the agroforestry is very much designed to enable the continuation of the size of machinery that's been operating the land already. And there are different models, some of which split the tenancy up, if you like, so that the fruiting element of it, the tree planting, can be managed by one body and the arable part by another, if you so wish, or you can choose to do it all under one umbrella with a new tenant farmer. I think the key thing here is it's very difficult for lots of tenant farmers to make that move because of the initial investment that's required, whereas here we have that opportunity to give it a kickstart, and then again, hopefully it will provide another exemplar of for other farmers to consider in the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Then lastly, also online, we have Councillor Heather Williams.
Thank you, Chair. And apologies if this has been covered. I've actually dropped out through internet issues a couple of times. But one thing, there's two things really that I wanted to raise, and I'm sure those of us that were on the outline application will remember well that this decision wasn't without local residents' sort of anxiety. And in fact, if I remember rightly, it was sort of the comments were that the residents would just have to suffer given the importance of Genome Campus. So I welcome what has been said about engagement, but I do think that needs to extend further because residents shouldn't feel that they suffer as a consequence, which was very much sort of, after the outline, it was you're just going to have to get on with it sort of attitude. The other thing to remind from outline is that I appreciate these are key worker houses in some respects, but they can be market sold unless that has changed. So we could have some clarification as to what the timing of the cut-off, because I think it was something like 16 weeks, but that's plucking it off the top of my head, Chair, and it was a few years ago now. That after, if it hadn't been somebody on site that took up the housing, that it could be sold off site to somebody unconnected as a standard sort of housing. So that in itself, I appreciate there's been lots of discussion around the connectivity on site, assuming everybody else, but I think there does have to be adequate provision made in case these houses are sold to people that don't work at Genome Campus, or indeed, lots of people's partners were. So if we could have some assurances around those two topics, Chair, I think that would help in progressing the project further. Thank you, Chair.
So let me start on that, Chair. So they're not really design guide issues in relation to the cascading. It is governed by the outline planning consent. What I can assure the councillor is that from the point at which the outline consent was granted, we've now obviously been able to have substantive surveys done with existing occupants on site, and it's very clear that there is really substantial demand for on-site occupation. And indeed, the European Institute will almost certainly commit to take considerable numbers because the demand is as apparent as perhaps wasn't clear at that time because one couldn't ask questions in a vacuum. But now that's very clear. In relation to community consultation, as Caroline said, I think we are doing absolutely as much as we can, and we will continue to do that. That's the urban and civic way. We are pathological about consultation and listening to people, and that's, as Councillor MacDonald opened with saying, I think that's something that we have been doing and will continue. I can commit that we will continue to do that.
Councillor Heather Williams, does that answer your question insofar as we can at this stage?
Yes, if officers could circulate, I'm just very conscious that a lot of planning committee members weren't on the committee at 2019. It might be worth having a refresher of the outline for all members, given also the size of the site. If you could look into that, please, Chair.
Yes, officers will look at providing that as part of the next stage in the process. I think that concludes questions from those online. Yes. I just wondered whether Councillor Peter MacDonald, as the principal local member, I appreciate there are a number of other villages affected, but wanted a further question or comment before we come back to the room.
Thanks, Chair. Just one overall comment. I think a lot of the individual questions and observations have already been made. As I said at the start, this is the biggest thing to happen to the community in 25 years. And by the community, I do mean the wider villages. Caroline has engaged with those communities. I suppose the final thing is to think about some of the nuts and bolts as we go through construction. By that, I mean the traffic management, and the movement of traffic in that area, especially around the 505. But that is something we're discussing, and I know Caroline is in discussion with County on that. So that's all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And then one more question for the room, and I will just put in a couple of questions myself after that. I think that will probably enable us to conclude it within the next 5 minutes or so. Councillor Annan Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for answering all our questions. I just wanted to point out, perhaps I am one of the few people who was on the Planning Committee in 2019 when the outline was approved, and I'm also local member for Waterbeach, where Urban and Civic have been delivering the new town there. And I wanted to point out that at Waterbeach, we've had very extensive engagement from Urban and Civic with the community and with the parish and with us as local members, which I very much appreciated. But I just wanted to ask, have there been any learnings and best practice from that? I know Urban and Civic have delivered in a number of locations, but I just wanted to ask whether there's learning and best practice from the experience at Waterbeach in particular that might be brought to bear in your stepping through the processes at Hinxton. Thank you.
Well, Caroline, you're absolutely best placed to answer that.
Yes, good and bad. Yes, absolutely. You know, I've been 5 years working on the development, so obviously Nigel has been involved at Waterbeach a lot longer, but you know, it was 5 years of very intensive work with the local community. So we've learned a lot, absolutely. And, you know, delighted to hear that, you know, you feel that the engagement has been at the right level. So the engagement here is equally as important, obviously. We're trying to take our learnings from, you know, the car-free zones at the school, how we approach community, how we look at creating spaces for the wider community, how we manage construction traffic is something we're talking to officers now, because we had a significant material import at Waterbeach, and I was so proud to say that we didn't have a single complaint, despite the scale of what we were doing. And it was absolutely working on the detail and working with, you know, local councillors, with the local community, to make sure we fully understand some of the challenges that are faced. And yeah, I think there's learning in every aspect of what we do. I hope that we've taken that, and particularly with even the landscaping and biodiversity, enhanced it even further for the campus.
Thank you for that. Yes, it's been very helpful to have that presentation. Really appreciate, Mr. Hugo, you and all of your team, the effort you've put into that. Just in summary, I think it would be fair to say that those of us who've been on the planning committee for a few years will not be surprised on your focus on community engagement. I noticed you stressed the word serendipity. You may have seen me just check in my phone to see whether that was a concept that we are used to in terms of the NPPF. As you would appreciate, it's not. But it's obviously a word we're going to have to get more used to. I just wonder, in closing, to what extent do you see, I mean, that is clearly a very important concept we can understand in relation to the scientists, both Wellcome and others on the site. To what extent do you see that concept as extending to the community or communities as well?
Thank you, Jay. It's true that serendipity doesn't form a part of the NPPF, but it starts with the campus and moves out to that broader community. And the reason in relation to the campus, it goes back to a reference that Julia made, that in a sense, what is being built here is a postgraduate place. PhD is pretty much an entry-level qualification in order to, and of course that, when we talk about encouraging serendipity, there's been a lot of work in recent years about intra-company working. So we've all heard about the table tennis tables that they'd have at the bottom of the Google office and all the rest of it. But ours is a little different from that. Ours is much more like that broader academic scientific community. So ours is encouraging intra-company and organization. And that's what happens at the moment with Sanger and EMBL. They are very strongly reinforcing, and that clustering is one that increases. So the first part is at that level, if you like, the scientific research. The second part is actually there is quite a lot of movement, as was referred to before. There's quite a lot of movement in and out because of that fact. It is like a postgraduate community. So the socialization, people getting to meet each other, is really important too on campus. And so that's the second level. And the third one is exactly as you described, in relation to the broader community, they're pulling together the sense that I don't want this to be finishing up as a campus and other play. We need to have that as a broader sense, a bit like universities sit within towns. It's that, and so it's those three levels, and that's why serendipity, whilst an unusual word, was very purposefully chosen, because it describes that three-tier approach that we're adopting, and it does feature in the design guide, and it's probably the only design guide in which the word does feature.
Right. Well, I don't think James Tipping or Vanessa, do you have anything to add?
Nothing to add.
Nothing to add. That's been a very useful introduction to the documents which are to come before us for the more formal stages, and we look forward to engaging with you further at that stage. And it only remains for me to thank you and all those who've taken part in this session very much for what I think was a very useful session. Thank you.
And as reciprocation, thank you all, and thank you, Chair.